You ever inherit something you didn't ask for and find out strangers have been treating it like their own personal playground? That's what happened to me. I'm talking motion sensor cameras strapped to my trees, footprints all over my land, and a group of people in fancy clothes standing behind my barn like they were planning a construction project. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't care. They were dead wrong. Let me back up. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my apartment, eating leftover pizza and watching TV, when my phone rang. The name on the screen said, Henderson and Associates Law Firm. I almost didn't answer. Usually when lawyers call, it's bad news, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Is this Jake Morrison? A woman's voice asked. Yeah, that's me. Mr. Morrison, my name is Carol Henderson. I'm calling about your grandfather's estate. I have some news regarding the property he left you. My chest tightened. Grandpa Henry had died 6 months ago, and I still wasn't over it. He'd been more than just family. He'd been my best friend. What about it? I asked quietly. Well, all the paperwork has finally been processed, she said. The 10-acre property outside of town is officially yours now. Deed's been transferred. It's all legal and done. I sat up straight. Wait, really? It's mine? Yes, sir. Free and clear. No debts, no liens. Your grandfather made sure of that. For a moment, I couldn't speak. That land meant everything to Grandpa. We used to camp there every summer when I was a kid. He'd taught me how to fish in the creek, how to identify different trees, how to start a fire without matches. Now it was mine. Thank you, I finally said. Thank you for letting me know. After I hung up, I just sat there staring at the wall. The property, Grandpa's land, my land now. I decided right then that I needed to visit. Not next week, not next month, this weekend. I wanted to see it again. Walk the trails, remember the good times. Maybe even camp out like Grandpa and I used to do. So that Saturday morning, I packed my truck. Threw in a tent, a sleeping bag, some food, and a cooler full of drinks. I grabbed Grandpa's old flannel jacket from my closet and put it on. It still smelled like him, like wood smoke and Old Spice. The drive took about an hour. I left the city behind and headed into the countryside, where houses spread farther apart and trees grew thicker. The GPS took me down smaller and smaller roads until I turned onto the dirt path that led to the property. That's when the feeling hit me. The trees looked the same. The old wooden gate was still there, a little more faded than I remembered. But something felt different. I parked the truck and stepped out. The air was cool and smelled like pine. Birds were singing. Everything seemed peaceful, but my gut told me otherwise. I walked through the gate and started down the main path toward the barn. Grandpa had built that barn himself, back in the 80s. It was faded red, with a rusty tin roof. As I got closer, I noticed the grass. It looked trampled, flattened, like people had been walking through it recently. That's weird, I muttered. Then I saw the footprints. Fresh boot prints in the dirt near the barn door. Not one set, multiple sets, different sizes. My heart started pounding. Someone had been here. Recently. I looked around more carefully now, and that's when I spotted them. Motion sensor lights. Small black boxes strapped to tree trunks with zip ties. At least 4 of them, that I could see. I walked up to the nearest one and touched it. The plastic was new, not weathered. These had been put up within the last few weeks, maybe even days. What the hell? I whispered. Grandpa never installed motion lights. He didn't believe in them. If someone wants to sneak around at night, he used to say, a little light won't stop them. These weren't his. Someone else put them here. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but stopped. What would I even say? Someone put lights on my trees? That didn't sound like an emergency. Then I heard voices, faint, coming from deeper in the woods, toward the back of the property. I stood completely still and listened. Definitely voices. More than one person. Maybe 3 or 4. My hands started sweating. Part of me wanted to run back to the truck, but this was my land. Nobody had permission to be here. I moved quietly through the trees, stepping carefully to avoid crunching leaves. The voices got louder. I heard a man laughing. A woman saying something about clearance zones. Finally, I crouched behind a thick oak tree and peeked around the trunk. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. 5 people stood in a small clearing about 50 feet from me. 3 men, 2 women. They weren't dressed for hiking. They wore clean button-up shirts, dress pants, and shiny shoes, completely wrong for walking through the woods. One man held a clipboard and was writing notes. A woman was taking pictures with an expensive-looking camera. Another man was measuring something with a long yellow tape measure stretched between 2 trees. They were on my property, doing something that required planning and equipment. We'll need to mark these boundaries clearly, the man with the clipboard said. Once we get approval, We can start the clearing process. Did the old man leave any documentation? One of the women asked. The clipboard man shook his head. Doesn't matter. We filed the environmental review request 3 weeks ago. That gives us access rights. My stomach dropped. Environmental review? Access rights? On my land? I didn't think. I just reacted. I stood up and walked straight toward them, my voice coming out louder than I expected. Who are you people, and what are you doing on my property? All 5 of them froze like I just appeared out of thin air. Their heads snapped toward me. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then the man with the clipboard forced a smile onto his face and took a step forward. Oh, well, hello there, he said in a smooth, fake-friendly voice. You must be the new owner, Jake Morrison, correct? Yeah, I said, my jaw tight. And you still haven't answered my question? Why are you on my land? The man extended his hand for a handshake. I didn't take it. He pulled his hand back and cleared his throat. My name is Richard Pemberton. I'm vice president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. We're just conducting a routine inspection of the area. Inspection? I repeated. I don't live in an HOA. This property has nothing to do with any HOA. Well, technically, Richard said, his smile tightening. This land falls within our environmental oversight zone. Your grandfather granted us access for wildlife monitoring and land safety evaluations. Every word out of his mouth sounded like a lie. My grandfather never said anything about that, I shot back. And even if he did, which I don't believe, he's been dead for 6 months. So why are you here now? One of the women stepped forward. She had short blonde hair and wore too much red lipstick. Young man, she said in a sharp tone. There's no need for hostility. We're simply following proper HOA procedures. Everything has been documented and filed correctly. Then show me, I said. Show me the documents that say you can be here. Richard and the blonde woman exchanged a quick glance. Then Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Here, he said, holding them out. Official access agreement, environmental oversight authorization, and a wildlife management order. I snatched the papers from his hand and looked them over. The first one was titled Property Access Agreement. It had a bunch of legal jargon I could barely understand. But at the bottom, where there should have been a signature, there was nothing, just a blank line. This isn't signed, I said, holding it up. That's just a copy, Richard said quickly. The signed original is on file with the county clerk. I looked at the second paper. It was a map, but so blurry and faded I couldn't even tell what property it was supposed to show. The third paper looked brand new, like it had been printed this morning. Wildlife Management Order was printed across the top in bold letters. None of this felt real. It all felt fake. Get off my property, I said, my voice steady and cold. All of you, right now. The blonde woman gasped like I'd just slapped her. Excuse me? We have every legal right to. No, you don't, I interrupted. You just handed me a blank agreement and some sketchy papers that look like you made them on your home printer. You have zero permission to be here. Leave. Richard's fake smile vanished. His face hardened. Mr. Morrison, he said slowly. You really don't want to make an enemy of the Meadowbrook HOA. We have significant influence in this county. If you refuse to cooperate, we can issue fines, file violations, and make your life very, very complicated. Fines for what? I nearly shouted. I'm not part of your HOA. You have no authority over me, or this land. The 5 of them stared at me in silence. Then Richard snapped his briefcase shut. Fine, he said coldly. We'll leave. But this conversation isn't over. You'll be hearing from our board. They walked past me single file, heading back toward the front of the property. As one of the men passed, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Stupid kid has no idea what he just started. I watched them disappear through the trees. My heart was hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking. What just happened? I stood there for a long time, trying to process it all. Then I walked back through the woods, taking pictures with my phone. The motion lights, the footprints, the cleared paths, the orange marker flags tied to trees. Evidence. I needed evidence. When I got back to my truck, I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the photos on my phone. I'd come here to remember Grandpa, to enjoy a peaceful weekend. Instead, I'd just caught a group of strangers trespassing, taking measurements, and making plans for my property. And they'd threatened me. I started the engine. I wasn't camping tonight. I needed answers. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time at the land Grandpa had loved so much. I don't know what they're planning, I said out loud, but I'm not letting them take this place. I had no idea how deep this went. I had no idea what I was about to uncover, but I was about to find out. The drive home felt longer than usual. My mind kept replaying the scene in the woods, those people on my land, Richard Pemberton's cold smile, the fake documents, the threats. We can issue fines, file violations, and make your life very complicated. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. How could they find me? I wasn't even part of their HOA. When I got back to my apartment, it was already dark outside. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I needed to understand what the Meadowbrook HOA was and why they thought they could just walk onto private property. I typed Meadowbrook HOA into the search bar. The first result was their official website. It looked professional, with photos of nice houses and smiling families. The homepage said, Meadowbrook HOA, protecting property values and community standards since 1998. I clicked through the pages. There was information about monthly meetings, rules about lawn care, paint colors, and fence heights. Typical HOA stuff, but nowhere did it mention anything about environmental oversight zones or access to non-HOA properties. I was about to close the laptop when my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it. The message was short. Violation notice will arrive Monday. You have been warned. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen. How did they even get my number? I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard Pemberton's face and heard his voice threatening me. Monday morning came too fast. I was getting ready for work when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Then something slid under my door, a white envelope. I picked it up and tore it open. Inside was an official-looking letter on Meadowbrook HOA letterhead. Violation notice. Property owner, Jake Morrison. Property address, 4782, County Road, 15. Violation date, November 23, 2024. Violation code, USC 47. Unsafe structure. Description. Property inspection revealed an unsafe wooden structure, barn, that poses a danger to the surrounding community. Structure shows signs of deterioration and does not meet current safety standards. Required action. Structure must be inspected by a licensed contractor within 14 days, or face removal by HOA authority. Fine, $500, due within 30 days. I read it 3 times, my anger building with each word. Unsafe structure? The barn was old, sure, but it wasn't dangerous. And how could they find me for something on my property when I wasn't even in their HOA? I grabbed my phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Meadowbrook HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Yeah, hi, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I just received a violation notice, and I need to speak with someone about it. There's been a huge mistake. One moment, please, Patricia said in a bored voice. I was put on hold. Elevator music played for nearly 5 minutes before someone picked up. This is Richard Pemberton. His voice was unmistakable. Of course it was him. Mr. Pemberton. This is Jake Morrison. I just got a violation notice about my property, and it's completely wrong. That barn is fine, and more importantly, I'm not part of your HOA. You have no right to fine me. Mr. Morrison, Richard said smoothly. As I explained on Saturday, your property falls under our environmental oversight jurisdiction. The violation is legitimate, and the fine is enforceable. No, it's not, I said, my voice rising. You're making this up. I don't live in a subdivision. My property is private land. You have zero authority here. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Richard said. But if you'd like to dispute the violation, you're welcome to attend our next board meeting. It's this Thursday at 7 p.m. Address is on our website. I'm not disputing anything because there's nothing to dispute, I shouted. This is harassment. Have a good day, Mr. Morrison, Richard said, and hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, shaking with anger. 2 days later, another envelope appeared under my door. This time, the violation notice was even more ridiculous. Violation notice. Property owner, Jake Morrison. Property address, 4782 County Road 15. Violation date, the 25th of November, 2024. Violation code, ENV 12. Illegal storage. Description. Unapproved firewood storage detected on property. Wood piles exceed height restrictions and pose fire hazard to neighboring properties. Required action. Remove all firewood within 7 days. Fine, $350. Due within 30 days. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Firewood? I didn't even have firewood on the property. Grandpa had kept some stacked by the barn years ago, but that had rotted away long before he died. The next day, a 3rd envelope arrived. Violation notice. Property owner, Jake Morrison. Property address, 4782 County Road, 15. Violation date, the 26th of November, 2024. Violation code, AES 03. Aesthetic violation. Description. Fence color does not comply with HOA approved color palette. Current color, weathered gray, must be changed to approved earth tones. Required action. Repaint fence, within 21 days. Fine. $275, due within 30 days. This was insane. The fence was ancient and barely standing. It was the same fence that had been there for 40 years. But what really caught my attention was a sentence at the bottom of this third notice. Violations documented via HOA. Surveillance cameras installed the 18th of November 2024. Surveillance cameras. The motion lights I'd seen on the trees. They were watching my property, recording it, using that footage to create fake violations. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I took pictures of all 3 violation notices and then sat down on my couch, trying to think clearly. This wasn't random. This was planned, coordinated. They were trying to harass me into, what? Selling the land? Giving them permission to use it? I needed help. Real help. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the county clerk's office. It was a small brick building downtown with an American flag hanging out front. Inside, a tired-looking woman sat behind a desk, covered in stacks of papers. "Can I help you?" she asked, without looking up. "Yeah, I hope so," I said. "My name is Jake Morrison. I inherited some property recently, and I'm having issues with an HOA claiming they have authority over it. I need to see my property records." That got her attention. She looked up at me with curious eyes. "What's the address?" 4782 County Road 15. She typed into her computer, her fingers clicking across the keyboard. After a moment, she frowned. That's strange." "What's strange?" I asked, leaning forward. "Well," she said, still looking at the screen. "According to our records, that property isn't part of any HOA. It's not in a subdivision. It's standalone private land, zoned agricultural." Relief washed over me. "So they can't find me, or tell me what to do with my property?" "Correct," she said. "They have no jurisdiction at all." She clicked a few more times, then her frown deepened. "But..." Oh, I repeated. "Oh what?" She turned the monitor so I could see it. "There's a request here that was submitted 2 weeks ago. It's from the Meadowbrook HOA. I leaned closer to read the screen. The document was titled, Petition for Boundary Annexation. "What does that mean?" I asked. The clerk scrolled down. "It means they're trying to officially add part of your property to their HOA boundaries. If it gets approved, they would have authority to enforce their rules on that section of land." My blood turned cold. "Can they do that? Without my permission?" "Not legally, no," she said. "You'd have to agree to it." "But..." She hesitated. "But what?" "But if they can prove the land poses an environmental or safety risk to their community, they could petition the county board to force annexation in the name of public safety. It's rare, but it has happened before." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. That's what they're doing. The fake violations. The surveillance cameras. They're building a case to steal my land. The clerk looked at me with sympathy. "I can't give legal advice, but if I were you, I'd talk to a lawyer. Soon." I thanked her and walked out of the building in a daze. They weren't just harassing me. They were trying to take my property. Legally. That evening, I drove back out to Grandpa's land. I needed to see it again. Needed to make sure I wasn't crazy. When I arrived, the sun was just starting to set. Orange light filtered through the trees, making everything glow. I walked slowly through the property, taking everything in. The old barn. The shed. The fence. The woods. This was Grandpa's legacy. His peace. His freedom. And someone was trying to steal it. I walked toward the back corner of the property where I'd found the HOA people on Saturday. As I got closer, I noticed something new. Another motion light. This one was bigger, mounted higher up on a thick pine tree, but this one was different. It had a small lens on the front. A camera. I walked up to the tree and looked closely. Sure enough, there was a trail camera strapped to the trunk with heavy-duty zip ties. The kind hunters use to watch deer. My heart raced. This wasn't just a motion light. This was actual surveillance. I reached up and carefully removed the camera from the tree. It was heavier than I expected. On the back was a small slot for an SD card. The SD card was still inside. I pulled it out and slipped it into my pocket. Then I carried the camera back to my truck and locked it in the toolbox. Evidence. Real, solid evidence. When I got home, I plugged the SD card into my laptop. A folder popped up with dozens of video files, each labeled with a date and time. I clicked on the first one. The video showed my barn from a distance. The timestamp said the 18th of November, 2024, 3:47 p.m. I watched as a white SUV pulled up near the barn. 3 people got out. I recognized Richard Pemberton immediately. The other 2 were people I'd seen on Saturday. They walked around the barn, pointing at different things and talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see them clearly. Then, One of them, a man in a blue shirt, walked to the edge of the woods. He came back, carrying something, branches, an armload of dead branches. He dumped them in a pile near the barn. Then all three of them took pictures of the pile with their phones. I felt sick. They were planting evidence, staging violations that didn't exist so they could document them and use them against me. I clicked on another video file. This one was from November 20th. Same thing. Richard and two others walking around my property, measuring things, taking notes, placing small orange flags on trees. I clicked through video after video. There were at least 15 different recordings of them trespassing on my land over the past 2 weeks. Then I found something even more disturbing. A video file labeled, Voice Recording, November 21. I opened it. The screen was black, just an audio recording, but I could hear voices clearly. How much longer do we have to keep this up? A woman's voice asked. Not long, Richard replied. We've documented enough violations to justify the annexation request. Once the county approves it, we can move forward with the expansion. And if he fights it? Another man asked. He won't, Richard said confidently. He's just some kid who inherited land he doesn't even want. A few fines will scare him off. He'll either sell it to us cheap or agree to the easement we need for the walking trail. What if he doesn't scare easy? The woman pressed. Richard laughed. Then we make his life miserable until he does. That's what we're good at. The recording ended. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking. They'd said it, out loud. Their whole plan. They were trying to force me to give up the land by harassing me with fake violations, until I either sold it or gave them what they wanted. I had them. On camera, on audio, admitting everything. The next morning, I made a call I should have made days ago. Kane and Associates law firm, how may I help you? Hi, I said. I need to speak with a lawyer about property rights. It's urgent. One moment please. I was transferred 3 times before finally reaching someone who could help. This is Miriam Kane, a firm voice said. I understand you have a property issue. Yeah, I said. That's putting it lightly. An HOA is trespassing on my land, planting fake evidence, trying to annex my property, and threatening me with fines I don't legally owe. There was a pause. And you have proof of this? Video proof, audio proof, documents. All of it. Another pause. Can you come to my office today? I'd like to see what you have. I can be there in an hour. I'll be waiting, Miriam said. Miriam Kane's office was on the 3rd floor of a modern glass building downtown. The waiting room had leather chairs and magazines nobody ever read. I sat there bouncing my knee nervously, a folder full of printed evidence on my lap. Mr. Morrison? A young woman with glasses appeared in the doorway. Miss Kane will see you now. I followed her down a hallway lined with framed law degrees and certificates. At the end was a corner office with windows overlooking the city. Miriam Kane sat behind a large wooden desk. She was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that looked like they didn't miss anything. She wore a dark blue suit and no-nonsense expression. Have a seat, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down and placed my folder on the desk. So, Miriam said, folding her hands. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. I took a deep breath and told her the whole story. Inheriting Grandpa's land. Finding the trespassers. The fake violation notices. The county clerk's discovery about the annexation petition. The surveillance camera, and all the videos. Miriam listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Do you have the videos with you? Yes, ma'am. On this SD card. I pulled it from my pocket and handed it to her. She inserted it into her computer and spent the next 20 minutes watching the footage in silence. I watched her face for any reaction, but she kept it neutral, professional. Finally, she turned back to me. Mr. Morrison, what they're doing is illegal on multiple levels. Trespassing, fraud, harassment, attempted theft through fraudulent annexation. This is serious. Can we stop them? I asked. We can do more than stop them, Miriam said, a slight smile appearing on her face. We can shut them down completely. But I need to ask you something first. What? How far are you willing to take this? Because once we start fighting back, they're going to fight harder. It could get ugly. It could get expensive. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Grandpa. About the hours he'd spent on that land, building the barn with his own hands, walking those trails, protecting that little piece of earth he loved. That land is all I have left of my grandfather, I said quietly. I'm not letting anyone take it. I don't care how hard they fight. Miriam nodded. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. First, we send a cease and desist letter. Certified mail. Return receipt required. We demand that all HOA members stay off your property immediately. Remove all surveillance equipment, and withdraw their annexation petition. Will they listen? I asked. Probably not, Miriam admitted. But it creates a paper trail. It shows we warned them legally before taking further action. Second, we file a police report for trespassing. The videos are clear evidence. And if they keep sending fake violation notices, we collect every single one, Miriam said. Every letter, every fine, every threat. It all becomes evidence of harassment. Third, and this is important, we attend their next HOA board meeting. I blinked. Why would we do that? Because I want to see how they react when confronted publicly. I want to watch them lie to my face. And I want witnesses, other HOA members, to see what their board is really doing. A small smile crossed my face. You want to call them out in front of everyone? Exactly, Miriam said. These HOA boards rely on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. They're used to getting their way. Let's show them what happens when someone actually has the courage to stand up. When's their next meeting? I asked. Miriam checked their website on her computer. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., at the community center. I'll be there, I said. So will I, Miriam replied. Now, let's talk about my fees. The next day moved slowly. I could barely focus at work. My mind kept drifting to the meeting that evening, imagining what would happen when Miriam and I walked into that room. At 6:30 p.m., I met Miriam in the parking lot of the Meadowbrook Community Center. It was a nice building, brick exterior, manicured lawn, a sign out front that said, HO, meeting tonight, all welcome. Ready? Miriam asked as we walked toward the entrance. As ready as I'll ever be, I said. Inside, we followed signs to a large conference room. About 30 people were already seated in rows of folding chairs. Most of them were older, retired couples, probably. They chatted quietly with each other. At the front of the room sat 5 people behind a long table with a white tablecloth. I recognized Richard Pemberton immediately. He was in the center seat, looking important in a dark suit. The blonde woman from the woods sat to his left. We took seats in the back row. A few people glanced at us curiously, but nobody said anything. At exactly 7 o'clock, Richard tapped a gavel on the table. Good evening, everyone. This meeting of the Meadowbrook HOA Board of Directors is now in session. He went through boring HOA business first. Someone complained about a neighbor's holiday decorations. There was a discussion about repaving the community pool parking lot, a vote on whether to change landscaping companies. I forced myself to sit still and wait. Finally, Richard said, Next item on the agenda. We have an update regarding the Eastern Expansion proposal. My ears perked up. Eastern Expansion. That had to be about my land. Richard stood up and walked to a screen where he projected a map. I recognized it immediately. It showed my property and the surrounding area. As many of you know, Richard began, the HOA board has been working on a proposal to extend our community nature trail system. We've identified a 10-acre parcel of land to the east that would be perfect for this expansion. He pointed to my property on the map. This land is currently unused and unmaintained. By incorporating it into our HOA boundaries, we could create beautiful walking trails, picnic areas, and recreational space for all Meadowbrook residents to enjoy. Several people in the audience nodded approvingly. However, Richard continued, his voice taking on a concerned tone. The current property owner has been uncooperative. In fact, he's been actively hostile to our attempts at community outreach. My jaw tightened. Lies, all lies. During our initial site survey, Richard went on, we discovered multiple safety violations on the property. An unsafe barn structure, fire hazards from improperly stored materials. And unfortunately, the owner has refused to address these issues. The blonde woman, I later learned her name was Carol Henshaw, stood up and added, we've sent multiple violation notices, but he's ignored every single one. We're concerned that this property poses a danger not just to our community, but to the environment as well. One of the audience members raised her hand. Can't the county force him to clean it up? We're working on that, Richard said smoothly. We've filed a petition for annexation on public safety grounds. Once approved, we'll have the authority to bring that property up to code and protect our community. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I stood up. That's not true, I said loudly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. Richard's face went pale when he recognized me. Mr. Morrison, what are you doing here? Listening to you lie to these people, I said, walking toward the front of the room. Everything you just said is a lie. Miriam stood up beside me, pulling a business card from her pocket. Miriam Kane, attorney at law. I'm representing Mr. Morrison, and I'd like to address the false statements just made by your board president. Carol stood up, her face red. You can't just interrupt our meeting like this. Actually, your bylaws say HOA meetings are open to the public, Miriam said calmly, and that any resident or affected property owner has the right to speak during community concerns. I checked. Richard recovered his composure and forced a smile. Very well. You have 5 minutes. I'll need less than that, Miriam said. She turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the property your board is trying to annex does not belong to your HOA. It never has. It's private land that Mr. Morrison legally inherited from his grandfather. Your board has no authority over it whatsoever. The violations are documented, Carol protested. We have photos of violations you created yourselves, I said, pulling out my phone. I have video proof. Richard's face went from pale to white. That's ridiculous. Is it? I held up my phone. I have footage of you and your board members trespassing on my property, planting evidence, staging fake violations. I also have an audio recording of you admitting your plan to harass me until I give up my land. The room erupted in whispers. People turned to each other, shocked. This is outrageous, Carol shouted. He's making this up. Show us the video. Someone from the audience called out. Richard banged his gavel. That won't be necessary. This meeting is about HOA business, not wild accusations. I think the homeowners have a right to know what their board has been doing, Miriam interrupted. Especially since it could expose the HOA to serious legal liability. That got everyone's attention. Legal liability meant potential lawsuits. Lawsuits meant higher HOA dues. Nobody wanted that. An older man in the front row stood up. I want to see the video. So do I, said a woman near the window. Me too, someone else called out. Richard looked trapped. This is highly irregular. We need to follow proper procedure. Show the video, the older man said firmly. Or, I'm calling for an emergency vote to suspend this board pending an investigation. Several people murmured in agreement. Richard looked at Carol. Carol looked at the other 3 board members. They all looked panicked. Finally, Richard said through clenched teeth, Fine, show your video. I walked to the front and connected my phone to their projector. My hands were shaking, but I managed to pull up the video files. The first video played on the screen. Clear as day, it showed Richard, Carol, and another board member walking onto my property. The date stamp was clearly visible. Then it showed them carrying branches and dumping them in a pile near the barn. The room was dead silent. I played the second video. Same thing. Board members trespassing. Measuring. Placing flags on trees. Then I played the audio recording. Richard's voice filled the room. We've documented enough violations to justify the annexation request. A few fines will scare him off. We make his life miserable until he does. That's what we're good at. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Then chaos erupted. Are you kidding me? This is illegal. I can't believe this. We could be sued. People were standing up, shouting at the board, demanding answers. Carol tried to speak. Now, everyone, please calm down. This is taken out of context. Out of context? The older man shouted. We just watched you commit crimes on video. Richard tried to restore order by banging his gavel, but nobody was listening anymore. Miriam leaned close to me and whispered, I think our work here is done. Just then, the conference room doors opened. 2 police officers walked in. The room fell silent again. We're looking for Richard Pemberton, one of the officers said. Richard stood up slowly, his face the color of chalk. I'm Richard Pemberton. Sir, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about a trespassing complaint filed against you. This is absurd, Carol protested. He's the president of this HOA. You can't just... Ma'am, please step back. The second officer said firmly. I'd filed the police report that morning, just like Miriam had advised. The officers had reviewed the video evidence and decided to bring Richard in for questioning. As the officers escorted Richard toward the door, he shot me a look of pure hatred. The audience members were in complete shock, whispering frantically to each other. Miriam stood up and addressed the room one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, you might want to consider electing a new board. This one has exposed your HOA to significant legal liability. If I were you, I'd hire a lawyer immediately to limit the damage. With that, we walked out of the conference room. Behind us, we could hear the meeting dissolving into shouting and accusations. In the parking lot, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Did that really just happen? I asked. Miriam smiled. It did. And beautifully, I might add. What happens now? Now we wait, Miriam said. The police will investigate. The HOA members will panic and probably force the board to resign. And tomorrow, I file our cease and desist letter anyway, just to make everything official. Do you think they'll back off? After tonight? Absolutely. They know they're caught. They know they're in serious trouble. Miriam paused. But Jake, I want you to understand something. This isn't over yet. What do you mean? People like Richard don't give up easily. He's humiliated now. Angry. He might try something desperate before this is finished. A chill ran down my spine. Like what? I don't know, Miriam admitted. But stay alert, keep your phone charged, and if anything strange happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. Understand? I understand, I said. We shook hands, and I drove home, my mind racing. I'd won a battle tonight, a big one. But Miriam was right. The war wasn't over yet. For 3 days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No violation notices appeared under my door. No threatening phone calls. No angry emails. Nothing. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt nervous. Like waiting for a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. On the 4th day, Miriam called me at work. Jake, we have a problem, she said, without saying hello first. My stomach dropped. What kind of problem? The HOA just filed a lawsuit against you. I nearly dropped my phone. What? For what? Harassment, defamation, and interference with HOA business operations, Miriam said. It's complete nonsense, but it's also expensive nonsense. They're suing you for $50,000. $50,000? I had to sit down. How can they sue me? They're the ones who broke the law. It's a SLAP suit, Miriam explained. That stands for Strategic Lawsuit, Against Public Participation. It's when someone files a bogus lawsuit not because they think they'll win, but because they want to punish you for speaking out. They're trying to drain your money and energy with legal fees until you give up. Can they do that? They just did, Miriam said grimly. The good news is that we can fight it and probably get it dismissed. The bad news is that it's going to cost you money in the meantime. I put my head in my hands. How much money? With court fees, filings, my time. Probably $5,000 to $10,000 minimum, even if we win quickly. I felt sick. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. I worked a regular job. I had rent, car payments, student loans. What if I can't afford it? I asked quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Then we look at other options. But Jake, I need you to understand something. If you back down now, they win. They get your land. They get away with everything they did. Is that what you want? I thought about Grandpa, about the barn he built, about the promise I'd made to protect his land. No, I said firmly. I'm not backing down. Good, Miriam said. Then we fight. I'll start working on our response to their lawsuit. In the meantime, be very careful. Don't go near any HOA property. Don't contact any board members. Don't give them any ammunition they could use against you. I won't, I promised. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at nothing. $50,000. They were trying to destroy me financially, just for standing up for myself. But I wasn't going to let them win. That weekend, I decided to visit the property again. I needed to clear my head, and being on Grandpa's land always helped me think. I packed a cooler with drinks and sandwiches, and made the drive out to the countryside. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, sunny, with a light breeze that smelled like autumn leaves. When I arrived and drove through the gate, everything looked peaceful. The barn stood silent in the clearing. Birds sang in the trees. For a moment, I could almost forget about the lawsuit and the HOA and all the stress. I parked my truck and got out, taking a deep breath of fresh air. That's when I noticed something wrong. The padlock on the barn door was broken. It hung open, the metal loop cut clean through. Someone had broken into my barn. My heart started racing. I approached slowly, listening for any sounds from inside. Everything was quiet. I pulled the door open. Inside, the barn was a mess. Tools were scattered everywhere. Old boxes had been torn open and dumped out. Grandpa's workbench was overturned. But the worst part was the walls. Someone had spray-painted words all over the inside of the barn in big red letters. Trespasser. Lawsuit incoming. Leave while you can. We own this land. I felt rage building in my chest. They'd vandalized Grandpa's barn. His barn that he'd built with his own hands 40 years ago. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Every spray-painted word. Every broken tool. Every overturned box. Then I called the police. Deputy Martinez arrived 30 minutes later in a county sheriff's car. He was a stocky man with a mustache and kind eyes. You're the one who filed the trespassing report last week, right? He asked as he examined the barn. Against that HOA? Yes, sir, I said. And now this. Deputy Martinez took his own photos and wrote notes in a small pad. Any idea who might have done this? The Meadowbrook HOA, I said. They're the only ones with a reason to. That's a serious accusation, the deputy said carefully. Do you have any proof it was them specifically? No direct proof, I admitted. But they sued me 4 days ago. This feels like retaliation. Deputy Martinez nodded slowly. I'll file a report for vandalism and breaking and entering. We'll investigate. But between you and me, son, unless we catch them on camera, or someone confesses, it's hard to prove who did this. What about the lawsuit? I asked. Doesn't that show motive? Motive isn't the same as evidence, the deputy said. but I'll make sure the detective knows about the connection. We're already looking into that HOA board for the trespassing stuff. This just adds to the case. After he left, I sat on the tailgate of my truck and called Miriam. They vandalized my barn, I said when she answered. What? When? I told her everything. The broken lock, the spray paint, the threats on the walls. Did you file a police report? She asked. Yes, deputy just left. Good. Send me all the photos. This actually helps our case. How? I asked bitterly. They destroyed my grandfather's barn. Because it shows a pattern of harassment and intimidation, Miriam explained. They sued you to scare you with legal fees. When that didn't work fast enough, they escalated to property damage. It proves they're acting in bad faith. A judge will see this for what it is. I hope you're right, I said. I am. But Jake, you need to install security cameras out there. Real ones. High quality with cloud backup. If they come back, we need to catch them in the act. Okay, I said. I'll do it this week. After hanging up, I looked at the barn one more time. The spray-painted words were still visible through the open door. I'm sorry, Grandpa, I whispered. But I promise I'm going to make this right. The next Thursday, I got a notification on my phone. The security cameras I'd installed were sending me an alert. Motion detected at 11:47 p.m. I was lying in bed, about to fall asleep. I grabbed my phone and opened the security camera app. The video feed showed 3 people walking through my property with flashlights. They wore dark hoodies and had their faces partially covered. They were heading toward the barn. My first instinct was to jump in my truck and drive out there. But then I remembered Miriam's advice. Let the cameras do their job. Don't put yourself in danger. I watched the live feed as the 3 people approached the barn. One of them pulled out a can of spray paint, but before they could start painting, bright floodlights I'd installed suddenly turned on, triggered by the motion sensors. The 3 people froze, blinded by the sudden light. Then they ran. They sprinted back into the woods, stumbling over roots and branches. Within seconds, they disappeared from view. I smiled. The lights had worked perfectly. I immediately downloaded the video footage and sent it to both Deputy Martinez and Miriam with a message. They came back. Got them on camera. Miriam responded within minutes. Excellent. This is exactly what we needed. Deputy Martinez called me the next morning. Got your video. Good quality footage. We're going to increase patrols in that area and see if we can identify those individuals. Do you think it's the HOA board? I asked. Can't say for certain yet, he said. But we're definitely investigating all connections. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Miriam's office again. This time, she looked almost happy. We have a court date, she announced. For the slap suit they filed against you, 3 weeks from now. Is that good? I asked. It's very good. Because we're not just defending against their lawsuit. We're filing a countersuit. She slid a thick document across the desk to me. This is our complaint, she explained. We're suing the Meadowbrook HOA, Richard Pemberton personally, Carol Henshaw personally, and the 3 other board members. We're suing for trespassing, harassment, property damage, fraud, attempted theft, through false annexation, and emotional distress. I stared at the document. How much are we suing for? $250,000 in damages, Miriam said, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages, if the judge decides they acted with malicious intent. My eyes went wide. $250,000? Jake, they've committed multiple crimes against you. They trespassed repeatedly. They vandalized your property. They filed false documents with the county. They tried to steal your land through fraud. And they filed a bogus lawsuit to intimidate you. Every single one of those actions has a price. But what if we lose? I asked nervously. Miriam leaned forward. We won't lose. We have video evidence, audio evidence, documents, police reports, witnesses from their own HOA meeting. We have everything we need to win, and the $50,000 they're suing me for will get thrown out immediately once the judge sees our evidence. Their lawsuit is frivolous. The judge will see that within 5 minutes. I took a deep breath. Okay, let's do it. Good, Miriam said. Because they just made their biggest mistake. What mistake? She pulled out another document. Carol Henshaw just filed an affidavit claiming that you threatened her at the HOA meeting. She says you were aggressive, hostile, and made her fear for her safety. That's a lie, I said. There were 30 witnesses. I was completely calm. Exactly, Miriam said, with a slight smile. She just committed perjury in a sworn legal document, and we have 30 witnesses who can prove it. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to win this. The morning of the court hearing, I barely slept. I kept waking up every hour, checking the clock. My mind running through everything that could go wrong. What if the judge didn't believe us? What if the HOA had somehow destroyed the evidence? What if their lawyer was better than Miriam? At 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee. By 6 a.m., I was dressed in the only suit I owned, a dark blue one I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. It still fit, barely. Miriam had told me to meet her at the courthouse at 8:30. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived early and sat on a bench outside the courtroom, watching lawyers and people in suits walk by with briefcases and serious expressions. At 8:20, Miriam arrived. She wore a sharp black suit and carried a rolling case that I knew was packed with evidence. Printed photos, video files on USB drives, copies of all the violation notices, police reports, everything. "Morning," she said, sitting down beside me. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Good," she said. "That means you understand what's at stake. But Jake, I need you to trust me today. When we get in there, let me do the talking, unless the judge asks you a direct question. Stay calm. Don't react to anything the other side says, no matter how ridiculous. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And remember, we have the truth on our side. They have lies. Lies fall apart under pressure." At 8:45, the other side arrived. Richard Pemberton walked through the courthouse doors wearing an expensive-looking gray suit. Carol Henshaw was with him, along with 2 of the other board members. Behind them came their lawyer, a tall man with slicked back hair and a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. Richard saw me, and our eyes met for a brief second. His expression was cold, hateful. Then they walked past us without saying a word and disappeared into the courtroom. "That's Gerald Moss," Miriam said quietly, nodding toward their lawyer. "He's known for defending HOAs in tough cases. He's good, but he's not that good." At exactly 9 a.m., a bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "Morrison versus Meadowbrook HOA," he announced. "All parties, please enter." My heart was pounding as we walked inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. At the front sat Judge Patricia Caldwell, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses. "All rise," the bailiff said. We stood as the judge entered and took her seat behind the bench. "Please be seated," Judge Caldwell said. She looked down at the papers in front of her. "We're here today regarding 2 related cases. First, Meadowbrook Homeowners Association versus Jake Morrison, alleging harassment, defamation, and interference with HOA operations. Second, Jake Morrison versus Meadowbrook HOA and individual board members, alleging trespassing, harassment, fraud, and property damage." She looked up at both sides. "I've reviewed the initial filings. This appears to be quite the conflict. Mr. Moss, you're representing the HOA?" Gerald Moss stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Miss Kane, you're representing Mr. Morrison?" Miriam stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Caldwell said. "Mr. Moss, since the HOA filed first, we'll begin with your case. Please present your opening statement." Moss stood and buttoned his suit jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about a young man who has waged a campaign of harassment against a peaceful community organization. My clients, the Meadowbrook HOA, were simply trying to conduct routine environmental surveys on land that borders their community when Mr. Morrison became hostile and aggressive. I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed quiet like Miriam told me." Moss continued. "He disrupted a public HOA meeting, made false accusations against board members, and caused significant emotional distress to community volunteers who were simply doing their civic duty. We're asking for $50,000 in damages to compensate for the harm he's caused." He sat down, looking confident. Judge Caldwell turned to Miriam. "Miss Kane, your response?" Miriam stood slowly, calmly. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Moss just said is fiction, and we can prove it. The Meadowbrook HOA has no jurisdiction over Mr. Morrison's property. It never did. They trespassed on his private land repeatedly, installed surveillance equipment without permission, filed fraudulent violation notices, and attempted to illegally annex his property through forged documents. When Mr. Morrison caught them and spoke out, they retaliated with this lawsuit. We have video evidence, audio recordings, police reports, and witnesses. This isn't harassment, Your Honor. It's self-defense." Judge Caldwell's eyebrows raised slightly. "You have video evidence?" "Extensive video evidence," Miriam confirmed. "Recorded by the HOA's own surveillance cameras, which they illegally installed on Mr. Morrison's property." "I'd like to see that," the judge said. Moss stood up quickly. "Your Honor, we object. That evidence was obtained without proper—" "Mr. Moss," Judge Caldwell interrupted, "are you saying your clients installed cameras on property they didn't own?" Moss hesitated. "The cameras were installed as part of a legitimate environmental survey." "That's a yes or no question, Counselor." Moss's face reddened. The cameras were installed on land that we believed fell under HOA oversight jurisdiction. But did it? The judge asked sharply. Another hesitation. There was a good faith belief. Mr. Moss, I'll ask one more time. Did the Meadowbrook HOA have legal authority over Mr. Morrison's property? Yes or no? No, Your Honor, Moss finally admitted. But, then any cameras they installed were placed without the property owner's consent, Judge Caldwell said. Which means Mr. Morrison had every right to remove them and review their contents. Miss Kane, show me this evidence. Miriam walked to the front and connected her laptop to the courtroom's display screen. The first video began playing. It showed Richard Pemberton and 2 other board members walking onto my property, clear as day. The date stamp showed it was from 3 weeks ago. Then it showed them carrying branches and staging them near the barn. The courtroom was silent except for the audio from the video. Judge Caldwell watched without expression, but I could see her eyes narrowing. Miriam played 3 more videos. Each one showed HOA board members, trespassing, measuring, taking photos, planting evidence. Then she played the audio recording. Richard's voice filled the courtroom. We've documented enough violations to justify the annexation request. A few fines will scare him off. We make his life miserable, until he does. That's what we're good at. When it ended, Judge Caldwell removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Mr. Moss, she said slowly, would you like to explain what I just watched? Moss stood up, looking shaken. Your Honor, that audio is taken out of context. What context? The judge interrupted. Makes it acceptable for an HOA board to say they'll make someone's life miserable until they give up their property? They were discussing legitimate community concerns. They were discussing fraud, Judge Caldwell said flatly. Miss Kane, what else do you have? Miriam presented the fake violation notices one by one. The unsafe barn notice, the illegal firewood storage notice, the wrong fence color notice. Your Honor, I've personally visited Mr. Morrison's property, Miriam said. There is no firewood. The barn is old but structurally sound. And the fence has been that color for 40 years. Every single one of these violations was fabricated. Then Miriam showed photos of the vandalism, the spray-painted threats inside the barn, the broken padlock. After Mr. Morrison exposed the HOA's illegal activities at their public meeting, Miriam explained. Someone broke into his barn and vandalized it with threatening messages. We also have security camera footage of 3 individuals attempting to return to the property 2 weeks later. She played the nighttime footage of the 3 hooded figures running away when the floodlights turned on. Judge Caldwell turned to the HOA's table. Mr. Pemberton, do you recognize any of those individuals? Richard shifted uncomfortably. The video quality is poor, Your Honor. It could be anyone, but it happened on Mr. Morrison's property, shortly after you filed this lawsuit against him. Quite a coincidence. Richard said nothing. The judge looked at the documents in front of her again. Miss Kane, you mentioned fraudulent annexation documents? Yes, Your Honor. Miriam pulled out copies of the annexation petition the HOA had filed with the county. The HOA attempted to annex Mr. Morrison's property by claiming it posed an environmental and safety risk to their community. These claims were based entirely on the fake violations they created. Judge Caldwell studied the documents. And the county approved this? No, Your Honor. The petition was still under review when Mr. Morrison discovered what was happening and retained legal counsel. I see. The judge turned to Moss. Mr. Moss, does your client have anything to say in their defense? Moss stood and whispered urgently with Richard and Carol for a moment. Then he faced the judge. Your Honor, my clients maintain that they were acting in good faith based on community concerns. Good faith? Judge Caldwell's voice was sharp. Mr. Moss, I just watched video of your clients trespassing, planting evidence, and discussing how to harass a property owner into submission. I've seen fake violation notices and evidence of vandalism. Where exactly is the good faith? Moss opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. Judge Caldwell leaned back in her chair. Here's what I see. This is a textbook slap suit. The Meadowbrook HOA had no legal authority over Mr. Morrison's property, but they wanted access to it. When he refused, they attempted to force the issue through harassment, fraudulent documentation, and illegal surveillance. When that didn't work, they filed this lawsuit hoping to intimidate him into backing down. She looked directly at Richard and Carol. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You've abused your positions, broken multiple laws, and wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit. Richard's face was pale. Carol looked like she might cry. The HOA's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Caldwell announced. Mr. Morrison will not pay a single penny. Furthermore, the HOA will pay Mr. Morrison's legal fees related to defending against this suit. Miriam squeezed my hand under the table. But the judge wasn't finished. Now let's discuss Mr. Morrison's countersuit, she said. Miss Kane, you're seeking $250,000 in damages? Yes, Your Honor. For trespassing, harassment, property damage, attempted fraud, and emotional distress. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. Mr. Moss, do you wish to contest these claims? Moss looked at his clients. Richard shook his head almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, Moss said quietly. Could we request a recess to discuss a possible settlement? No, the judge said firmly. Your clients had plenty of time to avoid this situation. They chose to double down by filing a baseless lawsuit. We're going to resolve this today. She looked at the evidence spread before her. Based on what I've seen and heard, I find the following. The Meadowbrook HOA and its board members are guilty of repeated trespassing on private property. They are guilty of installing surveillance equipment without authorization. They are guilty of creating fraudulent violation notices. They are guilty of filing false annexation documents with the county. And they are guilty of harassment and intimidation. With each word, Richard seemed to sink lower in his chair. I'm awarding Mr. Morrison $250,000 in compensatory and punitive damages, Judge Caldwell declared. I couldn't breathe. $250,000. Furthermore, the judge continued. I'm issuing a permanent injunction. All members of the Meadowbrook HOA board are prohibited from entering, contacting, or communicating with Mr. Morrison in any way. They are prohibited from filing any further claims related to his property. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges and possible jail time. She banged her gavel. Case closed. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then Miriam turned to me and smiled. We won. For a few seconds, I just sat there in shock. My brain couldn't process what had just happened. $250,000. We won. The judge had ruled completely in our favor. Across the courtroom, Richard Pemberton sat with his head in his hands. Carol Henshaw was crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Their lawyer, Gerald Moss, was packing up his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. Come on, Miriam said softly, touching my arm. Let's go. We stood up and walked toward the exit. As we passed the HOA's table, Richard looked up at me. His face was red and twisted with anger. This isn't over, he hissed. Judge Caldwell's head snapped up. Mr. Pemberton. Did you just threaten the plaintiff in my courtroom? Richard's face went white. No, Your Honor. I just meant, bailiff, the judge said sharply. Please remind Mr. Pemberton that I just issued a permanent no-contact order. If he speaks to or about Mr. Morrison again, he'll be held in contempt. The bailiff stepped forward. Sir, you need to remain silent. Richard clamped his mouth shut, but his eyes were filled with rage. We left the courtroom and walked down the hallway. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. Once we were outside the courthouse, standing in the sunshine, I finally let myself believe it. We actually won, I said, my voice shaking. We didn't just win, Miriam corrected with a smile. We destroyed them. That was one of the most one-sided rulings I've ever seen. What happens now? I asked. Now they pay you. They have 30 days to come up with the money. If they don't, we can place liens on HOA assets, garnish their accounts, whatever it takes. Will they have that much money? I asked. Miriam shrugged. The HOA itself might not. But they'll have to assess their members. Meaning every homeowner in Meadowbrook will have to pay extra HOA dues to cover the judgment, and trust me, they are not going to be happy about that. I thought about all those people at the HOA meeting who had seemed shocked by what their board had done. Now they'd all have to pay for Richard and Carol's crimes. What about criminal charges? I asked. The trespassing, the vandalism, the fraud. The police are still investigating, Miriam said. The judge's ruling today will help their case significantly. I wouldn't be surprised if Richard and Carol face criminal charges within a few weeks. We shook hands, and Miriam headed to her car. I stood there for a moment, letting the sun warm my face. Then I pulled out my phone and called my mom. Hey, sweetie, she answered. How did the court hearing go? We won, Mom, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. We won everything. She let out a squeal of joy. Oh, Jake. Your grandfather would be so proud of you. That's when I finally started crying. Not sad tears, happy tears, relief tears. Grandpa's land was safe. The people who tried to steal it were going to pay. Justice had been served. 3 days later, the local newspaper ran a story about the case. HOA ordered to pay $250,000 after illegal trespassing scheme. The article explained everything. The trespassing, the fake violations, the fraudulent annexation attempt, the slap lawsuit that backfired. It even included quotes from other Meadowbrook residents who were outraged at what their board had done. One homeowner was quoted saying, I can't believe they did this in our name. We're good people, and they made us look like criminals. Another said, our HOA dues are about to skyrocket to pay for this judgment. The whole board needs to resign immediately. The article went viral on social media. Within days, it had been shared thousands of times with hashtags like #HOA and #StandUp to HOAs. People from all over the country started commenting, sharing their own horror stories about abusive HOAs. My case had apparently touched a nerve. A week after the court ruling, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was from the Meadowbrook HOA. But this time, it wasn't a violation notice. Dear Mr. Morrison, this letter is to inform you that the entire Meadowbrook HOA Board of Directors has resigned, effective immediately. New board members will be elected at an emergency meeting next month. We deeply apologize for the actions taken by the previous board. Their behavior does not represent the values of our community. Please accept our sincere apologies and our commitment that nothing like this will ever happen again. Sincerely, the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. I set the letter down and smiled. They'd been forced out. The people who tried to steal Grandpa's land had lost everything. Their positions, their reputations, and $250,000. 2 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday morning, I drove out to the property with a truck full of supplies. I spent the whole day cleaning up the barn. I scrubbed away all the spray paint from the walls. I fixed the broken padlock. I organized Grandpa's tools and put everything back in its proper place. When I was finished, the barn looked almost like new. Well, old new. The way Grandpa had kept it. Then I went to the front of the property, near the entrance gate, and installed something I'd had custom made. A large metal sign. It was professionally made, with engraved letters that would last for decades. The sign read, Private Property, Morrison Family Land, Est. 1985. Trespassing by HOA prohibited by court order. Penalty, previously paid, $250,000. Thank you for your contribution. I stepped back and looked at the sign. It was perfect. Within an hour of posting a photo of it on social media, it had gone viral. Again, people loved it. Comments poured in. This is the best no trespassing sign I've ever seen. They paid $250K to learn a lesson. Beautiful. Every HOA bully needs to see this. Local news stations even picked up the story and came out to film the sign. I did a brief interview explaining what had happened and how I'd fought back. The story aired that evening on 3 different channels. A month later, I received the first payment from the HOA. $50,000. The first installment of the court-ordered judgment. I deposited the check and sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the receipt. With this money, I could pay off my student loans. I could buy a better truck. I could take a vacation. But I knew what I really wanted to do with it. I wanted to fix up Grandpa's property, repair the barn properly, maybe build a small cabin where I could stay on weekends, plant some trees, restore the trails, turn it into the place Grandpa had always dreamed it could be. Over the next few months, that's exactly what I did. I hired contractors to reinforce the barn's foundation and replace the roof. I built a small, cozy cabin with a porch overlooking the woods. I cleared the trails and marked them with signs. I even installed a proper driveway so I didn't have to bounce along the dirt path anymore. The property became my refuge. Every weekend, I'd drive out there, away from the city, away from stress, and just breathe. 6 months after the court ruling, I got a call from Deputy Martinez. Mr. Morrison? I wanted to let you know, Richard Pemberton and Carol Henshaw have been formally charged. Charged with what? I asked. Trespassing, vandalism, filing false documents, and fraud. They're facing up to 2 years in prison if convicted, plus fines. Good, I said simply. The trial is scheduled for next month, Martinez continued. The prosecutor might call you as a witness. I'll be there, I said. The trial came and went. Both Richard and Carol were found guilty on all charges. Richard was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay additional fines. Carol got 12 months in community service. The judge at that trial said something I'll never forget. You abused your authority and tried to steal a man's property through lies and intimidation. This court will not tolerate such behavior. Perhaps time in prison will teach you the respect for others' rights that you clearly lack. A year after everything started, I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, drinking coffee, and watching the sun rise through the trees. The land was peaceful now. The trespassers were gone. The surveillance cameras had been removed. The threats had stopped. It was just me and Grandpa's land, exactly the way it was supposed to be. My phone buzzed. It was a message from someone I didn't know. Hi. I read about your case online. I'm dealing with a similar situation with my HOA. They're trying to take part of my backyard for a community garden I never agreed to. Can you give me advice? I smiled and started typing a response. First, document everything. Take photos, save every letter, record every conversation, if it's legal in your state. Second, don't back down just because they threaten you. Third, get a good lawyer. And fourth, remember, they're counting on you being too scared or too tired to fight. Don't give them that satisfaction. Over the next few months, I received dozens of similar messages. People from all over the country who were being bullied by their HOAs and didn't know what to do. I helped as many as I could. I shared my story, gave advice, and connected people with lawyers who specialized in property rights. Some of them won their cases. Some of them settled. A few lost. But all of them fought back. And that mattered. 2 years after inheriting Grandpa's land, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers. "Hey, Grandpa," I said quietly. The wind rustled through the leaves of the tree above his headstone. "I wish you could see what I've done with the place. Fixed up the barn, built a little cabin. It's beautiful out there now, peaceful, just like you always wanted." I set the flowers down and touched the top of the headstone. "You taught me a lot, Grandpa. How to fish, how to start a fire, how to identify trees. But the most important thing you taught me was to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when people try to scare you." I stood there for a few more minutes, remembering all the good times we'd had together. Then I walked back to my truck, got in, and drove out to the property. When I arrived, I saw the sign at the entrance, the one reminding everyone that trespassing here had cost someone $250,000. I smiled every time I saw it. I parked near the cabin and walked down to the creek where Grandpa and I used to fish. The water was clear and cold, flowing over smooth stones. I sat down on the bank and just listened. Birds singing, water flowing, wind in the trees. This was worth fighting for. This peace, this land, this legacy. And I had won. The end. What did you think? If you enjoyed this story about standing up to an abusive HOA and winning big, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped their authority? Would you have fought back like Jake did? Or walked away? What was your favorite part of the story? And if this story inspired you, or made you think twice about giving up when someone tries to push you around, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, bullies count on you being too scared to fight back. Don't give them that power. Your property, your rights, your choice. Hit that like button if you're on Jake's side. Subscribe so you never miss another story of justice being served. Share this with anyone who's ever been pushed around by an HOA. They need to know they're not powerless. Because sometimes, standing up for what's right isn't just worth it. It pays $250,000. Thank you for reading, and remember, never let anyone take what's rightfully yours without a fight. See you in the next story.